This is Amend and Progress, your go-to podcast from Vidori for all things promotional material review. Get ready for actionable insights, valuable perspectives, and best practices to elevate your workflow and team morale.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Amend and Progress, Vidori's podcast about the material review process. I'm your host, Annalise, and today we're actually going to be doing a special release episode as a follow-up to our conversation earlier this year on the ABPI Code of Practice, as the code was recently released in September of this year. Joining me in the conversation today is Rina Newton, co-founder of Code Clarity and a code and compliance expert in the UK. Rina, welcome back to the show. Delighted to have you.
Thank you so much, Annalise. Delighted to be here.
You know, what a unique opportunity we have to sort of close the loop on the conversation. We recorded back in March around ABPI Code of Practice for 2024, anticipated, changes we were thinking were going to come out in this year's report. And so now that the report is here, want to sort of close the loop, hear from you on what was decided upon, what's included in the report, and how folks can think about sort of a transition period moving forward. But I think my first question or area of curiosity is, we thought it was going to be released in April. It was released late September. Was it worth the wait? Talk to me a little bit about sort of the delay in the release of the code and where you think this is coming from.
I mean, it's a great question. They did say that it would be released in April, and what they don't tend to do is explain the delay or the reasons for the delay. So that's always just a bit of a black hole in our knowledge. But we are used to, I would say, in the UK, very much, we understand that there are always delays when the PMCPA are promising social media guidance. That was a 2-year delay. And so everyone was just kind of like, oh, that's quite good. 6 months, not too bad, really. Could have been much worse. And that's maybe just a British thing. I don't know. So yeah, it was finally sort of released in September. But we need to also remember that the code doesn't just get sort of ratified by the PMCPA who enforce it. It has to go through the ABPI for their approval and their board. It goes to the MHRA, who are our regulators in the UK. We have an appeal board. So there's just so many sort of layers of people to make sure are happy with it before it can finally get published. But it's out now.
Sure. It goes through a journey, and that journey just happened to take maybe a little bit longer than anticipated. Okay, let's talk a little bit about scope. I know when we sort of talked earlier this year, we had sort of hypothesized or talked about things that you were anticipating that were going to be included in this year's code. Let's maybe do a couple of like what you expected to be in the code and maybe what was actually included within the scope, and maybe some key things you want to draw folks' attention to.
The predictions that I made was that QR codes would be introduced as a mechanism for companies to allow doctors to access the prescribing information. And I predicted that there'd be some changes around signatories. So they're the approvers in the UK, and there'd be sort of more kind of things for non-medical signatures to do, and there'd be a validation of knowledge that will be introduced for all signatories. So the first prediction came true, 50%, not too bad. And that is that QR codes, I think what was proposed was quite messy, and the kind of how categories of information had been decided upon was also a little bit worrying. And now that we've seen our proposal go in, we see there's a little bit of clarity has come through in the final changes. So the 3 types of materials where QR codes can be added are obviously your printed material. There is digital material to be shown to a customer. And then the third category is digital material that will be accessed by a customer on their own device. Because that last category, people felt like you wouldn't know how to access a QR code unless you had 2 devices.
Sure.
But the prediction around the signatories, I think that was just so big. This is what the PMCPA say, that so many comments about it, because it affects so many people, is they've decided to kind of take that away from this code, and they're now going to work on it separately. Nobody knows what that means. We don't know if that means there'll be a working group, whether that will be a public one, whether it will just be a private one, will that be guidance, a new document, a new code? Who knows? So it's very much anticipated there'll be another code, and probably quite soon.
Are folks excited about the QR code inclusion? Is this something that people are excited about? Talk to me a little about of like sentiment around that particular change.
Yeah, I mean, hugely excited. It sort of tells us that after 4 years of lobbying, that's how long it took, by the way, to get that change through. After 4 years of lobbying, the pharma industry absolutely can have an influence on the code. That's the first and probably the biggest message out of this, that I'm pulling my hair out normally saying to people, it's our code, we can influence it. And QR codes is a perfect example of that. The second big thing that people are so excited about is because it can demonstrate that we're finally modernizing. You know, QR codes is not a thing of the future anymore. We don't have to have embedded long prescribing information in our hard copy material. There's a recognition that nearly everyone has a smartphone. Nearly everyone is online and can access that prescribing information if they wish. So I think the industry are super excited by this.
Any anticipated challenges you think organizations are going to have to overcome, knowing you got the material with the QR code, but then you've got where the QR code leads? There's going to be just more to take a look at, more organization and, packaging up material for review. Any other like anticipated challenges you think organizations, while maybe this is an exciting change, will just be a shift in how folks are used to working?
Yeah, definitely. I think at the moment, we're probably pretty used to having a link that goes to the PI.
Sure.
So when you're asking about a significant shift, that doesn't sound too difficult, right? To create a QR code that takes someone to the same place. Well, we've got to remember that what if the QR code's too small? What if it's a little bit blurry? What if it can't be checked by the approver at the time of review and approval? So we're anticipating those sorts of problems. And what we're trying to warn companies about now is try and think about what your process is, before we all jump on the sexy bandwagon of QR codes. Let's think it through with all the potential risks in mind, because the code still uses language like make sure it's clear and prominent. And people have always suffered with not really understanding what clear and prominent means.
Okay. So some shifts, but fundamentally, people are used to looking at multiple material during review. Okay, that makes total sense. Now, you mentioned the signatory piece was not included within the code. It's my understanding that the code is a little bit smaller in scope than we anticipated. Is that correct? Okay, what are
Yeah.
some reasons you think that is?
So many, many years ago, when there was a public consultation, it was literally that. Anyone could comment on the code, the proposed changes, but also on anything else that you wanted to. That's how we got through pharmacists to be medical signatories. It wasn't up for a proposal. We lobbied for that, and we changed it. So this time we did the same thing. So the impression, Annalise, in the UK is that people commented on a lot of things, and the PMCPA were absolutely inundated with comments. A lot of the comments were the same comments. And again, we're pretty proud of that because we spent a lot of time creating comments that we hoped other companies would share. If they agreed with us, we were just hoping that they would share that. And we were hoping that the weight of the comments would demonstrate to the PMCPA that industry wants this. The industry wants to see more items for non-medical signatories to approve, less items for medical signatories to approve. And I think they were just so weighed down by the volume of comments that, yes, you're absolutely right. This code is very much seen as phase one. Let's just get the QR code stuff out really quickly. Phase two, we'll have time to think about the other comments.
Interesting. So phase two changes would be a new code release. And is there some thinking around when that would come to fruition?
Great question. I mean, again, nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Yeah.
I wish they had a PR manager. That would be great. I wish I had somebody in comms who could just proactively provide this information to us. At the moment, we've got clients who've reached out to the PMCPA with these sorts of questions.
Okay.
So we all hang kind of waiting around for what their response is, but it could be a year, it could be 2 years, nobody really knows.
Transition period. So, you had talked about a little bit about the transition period when we had a conversation earlier this year. How long do companies have to fully comply with the code, and any flexibility or clarity you can help illuminate in terms of the timelines or just this transition period more broadly?
So for the majority of the changes is a 3-month grace period. So what that means is that the code went live on the 23rd of September. Any new requirements of the code will not be enforceable until the 1st of January. So, for example, if you started using QR codes today and made a little bit of a slip, that won't be enforceable until the 1st of January. There are some sort of slight changes to some of the changes around disclosure. Companies have got a little bit more time for that. But we need to be mindful that although we talk about QR codes, there are a number of other significant changes, and maybe not as big or sexy as QR codes, but they do affect a lot of processes. And so 3 months actually is not that long for internal teams to look at all their processes, amend them as they see fit, get them approved, look at all the existing material in the approval system, look at all the existing material that has been approved. So it's actually quite a lot of work to do in only 3 months.
Is there any advantage to starting? I know we've talked a ton about QR codes, but I'm curious. Now, you mentioned you could start doing that now. Is there an advantage to starting to use some of those tactics now to see how it goes, work out the process challenges? Is there any advantage to sort of like trying to hop on the bandwagon earlier rather than later? Or do you really advise that folks have, clear SOPs in place and they've really thought through processes? Any pros or cons to starting earlier rather than later with some of these things?
I think that's a great question. I mean, in our experience, yes, certainly there are pros. You'd almost approach it like a pilot. That's the big pro. So for example, we've been mocking up what a QR code might look like on material and how it might lead to a single web page which carries all the prescribing information. How big would it be? What's the wording that we'd have to put around it? And if it looks too unwieldy, are we better off just sticking with the link? Until you practice those scenarios in real, these aren't like live materials, by the way. These are just looking at a client's existing materials and thinking, that banner ad's tiny. Now, if we replace that with a QR code, does it make it better or does it make it worse? And I'm not talking from a compliance perspective. We've got to look at the commercial as well as the compliance objectives to all materials. So that would be the big pro. The con would be if you approach changing a process in a very theoretical way. From experience, you can have people in medical or compliance kind of writing a process as per what the code says, and not as per what reality looks like, what the practical implementation looks like, what English language looks like. And there's always a danger that in 3, 4, 5 months, they're just going to have to go back and rewrite it. And nobody wants to do it twice in 6 months. So it's just kind of finding that balance between approaching a pilot and considering the steps, and then using those steps to consider what the process might look like, and then putting it all together and hitting that go button.
There is some value in doing. Basically, it's inherent in some of those comments. Okay, so I think that's super interesting. I have to ask, we talked about the color of the code cover in March. It's a peachy.
Do you know, so many people get so excited about the color. I remember, do we describe it as peachy? I think we do. It's sort of a very pale peach. Nobody guessed right. We were running a book on this. Nobody guessed it.
Maybe there's an opportunity they missed a Barbie pink tie-in, or
you know what? Barbie pink was the hot favorite. Yeah, it would have been great.
Oh my. Well, it is always fascinating to hear about the color piece because, that's just a funny little element that we can talk about. Anything else that you wanted to share, or just any like last parting words for the audience on the new code?
Yeah, I think the last thing I think would be really useful for the listeners is not to do with a change in the code, but a change to the constitution of the PMCPA.
Okay.
So how they enforce complaints, they've introduced something called an abridged process. And this is going to be like amazing because the number of incredibly boring complaints where an employee has liked a message that's global on LinkedIn and inadvertently human error, oversight, mistake has eventually caused a breach of the code. And the companies inevitably, say, yeah, we're really sorry about that. And they accept the breach. But that goes through the very long-winded process, which takes a lot of time. Average processing times are 15 months in the UK. And so the abridged process has been brought in specifically to target these breaches like that social media one I described, where the companies accept immediately that it was their fault. And that doesn't necessarily have to go through a panel ruling at all. And that should hopefully, in theory, that means PMCPA's workload will go down, the processing times will be far quicker, which means we as an industry will be learning about issues in a timely way that we can then implement quickly as well.
Oh, fascinating. Okay. No, that's a really important call out. Thank you for bringing that to the table. There's our follow-up conversation. What a fun opportunity to close the loop on something we talked about many months ago. But Rina, as always, just so appreciate your time and expertise. And thanks for coming on and walking us through these new code updates.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much, Annalise.
And folks, the conversation doesn't stop here. Follow Vidori on LinkedIn for updates on new episodes. Ask us questions. We'd love to get your feedback on any of our conversations to date. You can subscribe to Amend and Progress on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, this is Annalise signing off for Amend and Progress. Have a fantastic day.